Okay, hi there, Yurds. This is going to be our first video talking about photojournalism. In particular, we're going to be focusing in on the Nikon modes and features that we have in your book. That noise that you heard in the background, that was my dogs. So if you hear like little barking noises or little ting 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 of their collars, I'm at home right now. Anyways, so I know a lot of you have had photojournalism before, or sorry, you've had photo before. Most of you, I don't think, have maybe done photography in a journalistic perspective, so our learning in this class is going to be focusing on taking photos in a journalistic style for the sake of reporting and capturing events, not the sake of taking pretty selfies or Snapchat filters or things like that. So we're going to first talk about our Nikon modes and features. That way we can play around with the Nikons and you guys can be more adaptable as photographers. I know many of you are experienced, so this might be a review, or you might not use the auto modes. Great, perfect. But I want all of you guys to have like a base understanding of photography, and that way any of you feel comfortable taking one of our cameras and shooting and covering an event, because that's the purpose of training all of you guys in all of the different sections of your book, is that you are Renaissance kids and you can do everything. You're like a Swiss Army knife. Okay, so let's get started. So in your book, we have Nikon DSLRs. In camera world, there's Nikon, Canon, there's Sony. We just happen to have Nikon. If you talk to camera people, they probably have a preference. I came into the program, we have Nikons, so that's just what we stuck with. DSLR stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex. Just so you know. So what you should know about a DSLR is it's a great camera. It can be simple enough that it's just a point and shoot camera, just like a click and go camera or your cell phone, or it can be a very complex camera. It's very versatile. It has a really great sensitive optic mechanic in the camera, and also the sensors are really well built. So it's very, very versatile. DSLRs are even used in movie production. In fact, my husband has his media kids shoot on DSLR cameras. So when you check out one of our cameras, our Nikons, they come in a kit, and that is just so it makes it easy for me as the advisor to keep track of all of our gear and who has what and what they should be going out with and coming back with. So in each one of our camera kits, they'll contain a camera body. There will be a certain lens attached to that body. We try and partner the lens with the correct body that it should go with. Some of our stronger, more sensitive bodies have our more expensive lenses, so you pair a nice body with a nice lens, you get some really nice photos. Some of our less sensitive cameras we have with our fixed lenses, and that way they're just simple shoot and goes, kind of your just pretty basic camera. Anyways, so they come with a camera and a camera body attached, 2 batteries, 1 battery charger, and that way if you take it home the night before, you can charge your batteries before you go out shooting, a memory card in the charger in the camera, and then a camera cord to connect your camera to your computer. That way you can upload those photos. So each one of those kits has all these items in there, and there's a little kind of inventory on a piece of paper. Also, our cameras are named after Harry Potter characters. So I might tell you to go check out Harry Potter or Hermione or Ron or Dumbledore or Hagrid. And that's, again, just so we can kind of have some fun and then also keep track of which camera is which. So let's take a bird's eye view at a standard Nikon DSLR body. So here we can see you have the toggle to turn it on and off. We've got kind of this menu showing you what your settings are for the camera. This is where a flash either pops up or you can have an external flash. And over here we have the camera mode dial, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So on the camera mode dial, this green one, this is auto. This is auto with no flash. This is portrait mode, landscape mode. This is children's portrait mode. This is sports mode. This is the close-up kind of macro view, which means super zoomed focused. This is our night portrait mode. And then over here we have full manual. We have aperture priority, we have shutter priority, and we have program mode. Now, if you're one of our advanced photographers, I encourage you to stay on this side of the dial. So you may be totally comfortable with going full manual. perfect. You might choose aperture priority or shutter priority depending on if you're a low light or high light situation, or if you're in a situation where you have like sports going on, you want to make sure you have shutter priority. And then you might also choose to do program mode. I'll leave that up to you. That's our more advanced photographers in the class. Now, if you're just starting out, or if you're not as advanced or not as comfortable yet calling yourself advanced, I would encourage you to stick on this side of the dial, which is what we're going to be covering today. There is nothing wrong with sticking to this side of the dial, okay? If you're not comfortable and you're not sure, please stick to that side of the dial. That way we make sure to end up with good photos rather than you taking a chance and going and shooting a full manual and then we end up with nothing and then we don't have anything to show for that event and we're scrounging to come up with photos. So I would say I am a fairly experienced photographer, but sometimes I don't want to really focus in on, adjusting and things. I just got to go and shoot and cover. So I even shoot on full auto, and there's nothing wrong with that. I come back with great photos, many of which we've used in the book and on dividers sometimes, although we try not to have the advisor take too many photos because it's your book, not mine. But again, there's nothing wrong with that. You can take beautiful photography, but it's not beautiful if it's not in focus. So make sure you're in the correct mode and you're comfortable with your shooting. So let's go through the different modes. First, we're going to try and talk about auto mode. Auto, you're giving the camera full control. It's a very smart camera. It's like a computer. When you shoot in auto, it's basically a point-and-click camera. It will check out the sensors, see how much light you have going on. It will get everything in focus. You're just basically in charge of composing beautiful photography. So when you're shooting in full auto, you need to make sure that you have interesting composition. You got good leading lines, maybe you're using rule of thirds. You're looking at different perspectives like worm's eye perspective or bird's eye perspective, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this week. But the main thing in auto mode, you're giving the camera full control, and in this one you really got to focus on your composition. With your notes this week, if you would please include the icon and then a quick little description about what that mode does for you. That's how I'd like your notes to definitely be organized. So make sure you have a little sketch of that icon and some notes about what that mode does or what it's good for. Okay, so next we have auto mode, no flash. Again, this is where you're giving the camera full control over focusing, but this one you're overriding the ability for the camera to produce a flash. So you really need to be conscious on if you're in a low light situation, don't use this. However, if you're in a situation where you really don't want the flash going off, but yet you want the camera to have control, this is a good mode to go in. So next we have portrait mode. This is great for getting those mug shots in our book when we do a quick interview of somebody and we just have like their quote next to their picture. Portrait mode is beautiful for that. It enables the camera to focus in on your subject matter and then make everything else in the background blurry, which creates a really nice kind of professional looking portrait. Again, with this one, you got to make sure your composition is good. You don't want to place anything up against a wall. So if you have a person for a portrait, you want to have something with depth behind them, and that way the camera knows to focus in on your portrait rather than what's behind them. And again, this is really great for doing those mugs. So landscape mode, kind of the opposite of portrait mode. This one, just your foreground, your focal point is in focus and everything else behind that is blurry. And in this one, it's great for larger scenes. It puts everything in focus and gets as much detail as possible. However, this one's really only good for good lighting situations. So if you're on the football field and it's dusk or nighttime, your landscape mode is not going to work for that. You might want to go into full auto and produce a flash. Creates great depth of field. Again, this is great for bigger, more open shots, big crowd shots, something where you're not worried about creating like a focal point because everything's going to be in focus. Child mode is kind of like portrait mode, only it hyper exaggerates the coloring. So this is really good for making colors pop if you have something very colorful. It only works on children over 15. Haha, just kidding, it works on everybody. But it intensifies the color. It's portrait mode with the saturation up to increase. It makes the camera's sensor for colors more hypersensitive, so it exaggerates colors when you have a color photograph. So again, this works well, same thing for portrait mode. Have your foreground object close to you and not up against something in the background. Like if it's a brick wall, we don't ever put anybody up against a brick wall because that's boring. But you just don't want to have your person close to their background, a little bit further back. Sports mode, this one on the camera, what it does is it makes the shutter the priority, and so the shutter is how quickly the camera captures things. So if you have a fast shutter, it captures fast movement. If you have a very slow shutter, you need to make sure that you have somebody that's still, because the camera is taking a longer time to pull in all of the information. So anyways, that's the long of the short of it. I could get into more detail about the camera features and the mechanics, but that's like the Reader Digest version of what happens. So again, this makes shutter with a priority, puts it on a faster mode. This one's great for fast movements, that way you don't get any blur when somebody's like going up for a layup, or maybe they're catching a pass or something like that. Hence, it's really great for covering sports. So when you are covering sports like girls tennis or cross country and they're running past you, have it on sports mode, otherwise they're going to turn out blurry. May not always be fast enough to get rid of the blur. This is only to a certain point, a certain threshold on the shutter speed. So your athlete could be going way too fast for even the faster sped up shutter speed. So blur is possible on the sports mode. Okay, so this is the close-up mode, otherwise known as the macro mode. This is really great for when you're trying to capture really great intense details of something very close to. It doesn't work for anything further away, but again, this is really great for making the camera more sensitive to pick up those close-up details. We would use this in the yearbook if we're taking photos of maybe some objects to do little cutouts. Maybe it's like the top 5 things in your backpack, and we want to get a picture of like a makeup case or somebody's, I don't know, cool pen or something, and so we put it on a flat surface and we get our camera in close, and we would want to put on the close-up mode, that way the camera is more sensitive to the details. That's what this is used for. Night portrait mode, same as portrait mode, however it makes the camera allow in more light, and because there isn't a whole lot of light out around the person, we need to let the camera allow in more light so they can kind of develop the photo and register those details. So it creates like this softer lighting effect on faces and backgrounds. However, when you do the portrait mode, it's really good to plan ahead and bring a tripod, because you're going to have to keep your camera really still. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a blurry person, and that person has to be still. It can't be an action photograph. So again, portrait mode is beautiful for doing like still portraits where the person can hold still. We don't want anything that's moving. All right, lastly, we're going to talk about the Nikon autofocus settings. I'm just going to go through these really, really quick. This one is spot focus. On here, you can adjust where there's this little spot on your camera where you want it to focus. So you tell the camera where on the lens you want it to focus in on, and that's where it's going to focus, and everything else around it is going to be blurry. And you can adjust where that spot is. This one is called dynamic range focus. Again, it has that spot, but it's a little bit further out that it senses where it should focus. So it's a little bit broader of a focus point. Again, you can adjust how big that is or where it is on the camera. This one is just straight up focus all the way across the board. The camera will decide what should be in focus and what shouldn't. So along with the program modes of the camera, you can also adjust how you want it to focus, and that can really change what your photograph looks like. Okay, so that's just the basic Nikon modes and features. Our photo editor will go through more detail with you, and we're going to do some practice photography so you can kind of see the difference of each one of those modes and experiment with the cameras and just really get to know your camera equipment for yearbook. That way you feel comfortable checking it out and using it. And we will have more instruction with cameras in class and with the additional videos. Thanks so much for tuning in, Yerds. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and please take notes and make sure you have those symbols in there and have those ready for me to check them in class. Awesome. Have a great one. Bye, guys.